You should be seeing my PowerPoint. And I'm going to take silence to be golden and that you're able to see that. Okay. I began my Agile journey quite a bit ago. And at the same time, also became a telecommuter. And I found that to be challenging. How do we connect in a way that allows us to have a similar collaboration that I used to have in the office? During my days of working in New York City and commuting into the office, one day I realized that I was working with folks around the globe and I could potentially do this from my apartment. And in doing that, I began to come across some of the challenges of telecommuters, and that was amplified by the need to make development and product development a contact sport, as we like to say in Agile. Some of the challenges that I faced are listed here and are the more common ones that distributed Agile teams faced. Many include the the lack of collective identity, the need to belong to a team is somewhat um, amplified and is diluted when you try to do it in an agile distributed environment. The level of communication or the actual understanding of that communication becomes a challenge. There's lower morale by the individuals participating in distributed agile teams, maybe because of some of the factors that I mentioned. Um, and we've observed that there's a slow impediment resolution. What that means is that if you're having problems, escalating those problems to be resolved through the various channels becomes more challenging. There's some knowledge exclusion, and we'll talk a little bit about that and why that might be the case. But just being exposed to that osmosis, that visual radiation that you are at the office becomes a challenge as well, right? You do begin to see when you have multiple teams, misalignment between the teams, and that leads to a lower trust level. And there's a lack of common goal. There might be some agendas that get in the way of that, or just not understanding what some of the things that we're trying to achieve as a team are at the moment. Right? So these are the top items. You might be facing other challenges. What I like to I mentioned that we're hoping to learn as much in this session. I'm going to go to the chat and we're going to use the chat as a form of interacting, as a form of tooling and learning from each other. I'm just going to put a delimiter on the chat, and I'm going to say top challenges your team is facing. And I'm going to put a question mark on that. And feel free to type in your chat. Um, Try to have it so that you reply to everyone and not just myself, so that everyone can see additional challenges that you might be facing across different industries, in particular in your environment. Yeah? So feel free to use the chat and don't be shy. There's no wrong answer here. We just want to hear a little about what you're facing in your own environment. Okay? And as we do that, burnout. Thank you for sharing that, Ming. 136 of these items that were before. Number one, no collective identity. Number three, reduced morale. And six, teams are misaligned. Yeah, a lot of people related problems or challenges, I should say. Lack of ownership. And then number eight, lack of common goal. Um, there are people-centric problems. Toro just acknowledged that, and the need for urgency and the fact that there's a lack of empowerment, that ingrained agile mindset of self-organizing teams is sometimes diluted. Yeah, excellent. Keep them coming. Thank you for that. Um, Low trust, low transparency. Great, great. On the ground, at the practical application that wrong word, not application, but at the practical implementation level, we find that some of the solutions to these challenges, or some of the ways to mitigate these challenges, are found in these areas, in the tools, in the roles, in the events, in the artifacts, and in the techniques. And I'm going to try to paint a picture of what some of those challenges are, and perhaps introduce some mitigations in how teams are approaching these. The field is wide, and there's quite a lot to cover. So I extracted a few of the techniques that perhaps can help us talk through um, what can be helpful in the field. And the first thing we need to recognize is that not all agile distributed teams are built the same, right? There's the idea that we can have three major forms of distribution. The first is that we have distributed teams. That is two or more co-located teams in different places. Those might be within the same time zone. Those might be across countries in different time zones. The second composition, in no particular order, is distributed members. This is what we're all facing today with the pandemic that we're facing, where we went from 0 to 60 to become fully distributed team members. This is the idea that there's no central hub and that we're all connected remotely. It would have taken years for us to get to where we are in present time as far as distribution and remote access, but COVID-19 has accelerated that, and hence we have a need to be more efficient and effective right away in distributed environments. And the last one is this hybrid distribution. Hybrid is the combination of the two, where you might have a co-located team, and then there's some members that are dialed in or that are remote, right? I will add that the hybrid distribution before COVID-19 was one of the most challenging of the three. And that's because it had individuals that were not on the same footing. It had individuals that were remote and they were sort of considered sub-citizens of the team, if you will, by the fact that the team created a tribal environment in the local co-located pod, and then those team members that would dial in or that would remote would somewhat be considered part-time or not always a priority. Today, most of us are on equal footing. Most of us are all distributed. I'm going to take a quick poll here, and I'm going to ask you to tell us what your composition is. Wait for that delimiter, composition. I just need to spell that right. And tell us if you are distributed teams, distributed team members, or a hybrid distribution. And that would be in present day, how you are doing it today. I would expect that, well, let me not anchor and wait for some of those answers to come in. We've seen some hybrid, we've seen distributed team members. We're seeing hybrid, more hybrid than I would have expected to see. That's great. That means that many of you have gone back to the office and some of you are still remote, or you're planning to keep it that way. Distributed team members, hybrid models. Great, a lot of hybrids. I will add that a recent survey we ran in Agile Genesis showed that most team members would prefer to have a permanent hybrid environment, meaning they want to be able to telecommute some of the days of the week and go into the office other days. So I personally expect that the hybrid environment will become the norm, not the exception, right? In terms of these different compositions, as far as the tools, as we walk through the Agile TREAT acronym, the tools they have different challenges for different compositions. Distributed team members, the majority of the problems are around security compliance of the tool, so not having the right tool for the job because of compliance issues. Sporadic organization tool usage throughout, where there's lack of consistency between the tool choices. And on top of that, inconsistent use of the tools throughout the organizations, right? Um, Distributed members, on the other hand, they tend to face problems such as where do I go to find the information? Where do we put that? Or the artifacts have not been updated in a couple of days or since yesterday. So now I'm looking at outdated information. The onboarding of the tool and the individuals on the tool becomes a challenge for distributed members because these folks are trying to figure it out on their own. They don't have a central place where someone can walk them through that, right? And you see some of the other ones here. Hybrid team members, in addition to the two groups problems, in other words, the challenges that are faced by distributed teams and distributed team members, hybrid team members also face situations such as the missing complex collaboration features. Breakout rooms is one of the big missing ones for a lot of folks. Those that can't use Zoom are somewhat left out. And these are ways in which you can mitigate many of the things that usually come up, such as language barriers are usually addressed through by placing teams in smaller breakout rooms. Having low technical guidance. Who do I go to when I need to figure out how to use this tool? And they usually reach out to peers instead of having a central location, right? So you see that the problems are different in terms of the tools, and there are various tools that essentially become sort of the group of tools. But before I move to those, I want to do a quick survey again. What are some of your tools challenges today? What kind of challenges are you facing? And I'm going to put that in question marks here, and feel free to give us some of your thoughts. What are some of your current tool challenges in your environment? Come on, don't be afraid. There's no wrong answer here. There we go. Cloud licenses, consistent use of the tools, lack of consistent tools and hybrid models, internet bandwidth, infrastructure. Yes, thank you for that. We're going to get a little into that as well in the upcoming points. Irregular access, too many tools, just being overwhelmed. Where do I find the information and which tool are we using? New tools like Mural, learning some of those new tools because they tend to require a different mindset. Different people find different tools that do the same thing. Yeah, so there's this idea that, hey, we're using a lot of tools and we're using them for different reasons, right? So some tool examples, I am often asked, hey, what tools can I use? I try to be brand or tool agnostic, but I find hard to avoid this question. So I'm just giving you a quick snapshot. But what's important here are the tool categories. When you are considering and when you are having problems collaborating, tools are your friend in a distributed environment. That's one of the areas that took us a while to figure out in terms of distributed Agile, because we keep an Agile mindset, we follow the Agile manifesto, and tools were not necessarily first-class citizen in our Agile process. So we find that in distributed environments, we absolutely need to be very tool-centric. And you need to have at least one of the, in each of these categories. You need to be able to have some tool that facilitates your events and your activity. Fun Retro is very popular. Small tool, very lightweight, no commission, by the way, just some of my favorite and one of the ones that I observed that are being used frequently. Fun Retro, because retrospectives tend to be one of the areas where distributed teams are challenged, how to keep those enticing retrospectives when you're distributed. Tasty Cupcakes gives you ideas on running some of these events and retrospectives in a way that you don't need to use an actual tool, but what are some different perspectives to engage the team? Pointing Poker, free very, very good for story or estimating. And games storming, again, just giving you something to add to your arsenal of tools to keep the teams engaged. Unified communication, I think that goes without saying. Many of you now, it's hard to hide from our mobile phones, but having the ability to walk away and still be accessible to the team has become essential. Of course, that has the burnout factor, so be careful. That's where team agreements come in. How do I and when do I prefer to be contacted? But having the ability to contact anyone in different environments is key. Project planning, we all love Jira. Rally, great tools. Version 1, Trello, don't need to go into those. I think you're covered in that. But then your product pipeline, GitHub. If you're dealing with software, you might be dealing with other types of product development. But in the software arena, it's very important to have some of these pipelines. Microsoft Azure DevOps is becoming more and more common. I am seeing it across organizations as I go in, also for the project planning and tracking aspect of it. So combining those two into one. Web conferencing, we're in Zoom right now. There's Teams, there's Amazon, there's Chime, GoToMeeting, RingCentral. Again, I mentioned that some of the key elements that are missing from the other ones are things like breakout rooms. WebEx does have breakout rooms, the others not so much. In fact, as we speak, Teams, Microsoft Teams, is in the process of launching their breakout rooms. So soon, for those of you that are using Teams and are locked into Teams, you'll be able to use the breakout room feature. It's slated to come out mid-October, which I would expect it's any time now. Knowledge sharing. Some of you mentioned information radiators and transparency. It's key that you have some form of wiki, quick way of developing information radiators, whether it be Confluence, whether it be Microsoft SharePoint, whether it be Google Docs or anything else that allows the team to essentially post items that the rest of the organization can see. And then on the instant messaging, I don't think we need to go into those. Collaboration whiteboard. This is the new boom in tools, right? The real-time whiteboarding. One of you volunteered Mural before, not to be confused with Miro. They are two completely different products. They do very, very similar things. I find that they have both have their strengths and weaknesses. There's also some more economical alternatives. Microsoft Whiteboard is something that is available to you if you're using a Windows system and also on your mobile device. But the whiteboarding tools, critical for brainstorming. It's a must. Make sure that you look into these if you haven't already adopted one. Okay. And I see that some of you already started volunteering some of the tools that you use, right? But let me put here your favorite tools. And please start sharing some of those so that the rest of us can see what we're using across the board and maybe some of the best of breed based on popularity. Right? Slack for instant messaging. Yeah, huge. Also for being able to bring the teams together into a community, and it does have real-time phone communication and unified communication capabilities. File sharing as well. Skype, some of you are using Skype. Skype is not as common anymore. Teams is sort of taking that on, but glad to see you're using that. Lucid Chart for, again, whiteboarding and sticky treatment and being able to do some collaborative design and brainstorming. WebEx. Not Miro, someone wrote. Apparently there's a little bit of an adversity to Miro there, and I can understand that. If you don't like Miro's interface, consider Mural. It's a little more focused, and sometimes it's a matter of preference. Menti for surveys. Yes, Menti is great. It has a cloud, word cloud that allows you to sort of surface things to the top. I like that as well. And then Teams for unified communication, and of course, Zoom here. Excellent, excellent. Very good. Someone say that Teams is a little too, it's very useful, but a little too heavy. And I could see that, right? Here is a snapshot of Miro alongside of Mural. I included this one because out of the breed of different tools, these might be the newer ones that we're not as used to. This is a snapshot of an actual PI planning, a program increment that I facilitated. And you can see how easy it lends itself to the program planning board and being able to connect the strings and for the teams to collaborate. In fact, I'll tell you that after introducing organizations pre-COVID to using Miro, in this case is Miro, they prefer to use the tool even though we were all physically together in one big room, because they like the idea of not having to take down the physical board and transferring everything over. It does have connectivity to Jira and other management tools. So you have an alternative there. Excellent. Let's talk about roles. Some of the role challenges that we see across different distributed teams. If you are in a distributed team environment, again, two hubs or more, you might have things like overlapping roles. You might be facing challenges such as the need to sync up between the 2 or 3 or 4 different locations and having some communication challenges to when it comes to syncing up. You might have some command and control aspects where one part of the organization feels empowered, but the other one doesn't because they're waiting for the next marching orders. You might have a lot of urgent interruptions because things that were brewing over there were not known here, and now you need to bring that about in a quick manner. And you are likely are going to face low team cohesion as a full team of teams, right? In distributed members, no central location. Well, you're still going to deal with some role overlaps. There might be a little bit of that, right? Onboarding the team members becomes a bit of a challenge into their roles because they're not benefiting from the visual radiation and from the water cooler conversations. You need to be a lot more methodical about how you onboard your teams. The team bonding. How many of you have been in, we won't do this in chat, we'll just do it by video. How many of you have been in virtual happy hours, let's say in the last 2 hours, right? So a lot of virtual happy hours going on in Zoom right now. It's a way for us to build some of that social element that is missing. Access to information becomes a challenge. Time zone differences is the mega issue in any form of distribution, okay? Now, this isn't about scaling. This is about distribution, okay? This is about the idea that you are where you are and we're helping you through without needing to reorganize your organization. I could tell you that co-location works best. Bring everybody together. Well, you're not going to do that. You are where you are now. So we're giving you the tools to be able to, and the information to be able to collaborate well in a distributed environment, right? But you are going to face significant challenges when your teams are distributed across time zones. And your teams in a distributed team member environment are going to be more passive. It's hard to project that energy out or to be called upon on a regular basis. So your team, it's easy for team members to hide, and that creates a lack of cohesion again. Hybrid teams facing all of the previous challenges also lack leadership support. Why is that? Well, it comes from the tradition that remote employees, and forgive me if I sound a little harsh, were considered second-class citizens when you were dealing with a team that was co-located, right? So getting that support and getting the leadership to now fully support remote team members has become pivotal, right? And I think that the scenario that we're in has allowed that to fast forward a few years, as I mentioned at the beginning. So we're in a good position where we all have equal footing today. Silo Formations can occur very easily in hybrid distributions where I pick out the team members and I just call them via Zoom and not the other ones, or those individuals that are in a pod in a co-located environment don't include the folks from the other remote areas. And then there it is, the pressure to overcommit. We see this a lot in distributed environments because there's a low trust level where team members are being asked to deliver more and more and more in the hopes that if they deliver 50% of that, we're in a better spot, right? And lack of common goals tends to be a theme when it comes to the hybrid distribution teams. Yeah. So with those, I see that transitioning from a command and control to empowering teams is a challenge, and someone volunteer that. Thank you, Chris. Thank you. From the roles, challenges. Tell us a little bit about the challenges that you're facing in roles. Going to put that delimiter there and keep them coming. The frequent roles that we see in distributed environments, distributed Agile, look like this. There might be some surprises here. Again, this is not about scaling. There are likely other roles if you're in an enterprise or if you're practicing something like SAFe. This is about collaboration and distribution. Yeah. So someone mentioned, thank you, Ming, no clear ownership, silo and invisible ownership. Yeah, these are very common when it comes to distribution. It comes back to that role confusion. We need to clarify those roles be very transparent about those in a distributed environment. The Scrum Master, no surprise there, product owner, chief product owner, or product manager, just this idea of an individual that can bring the product owners together so prioritization can happen on an ongoing basis. The developers, of course, having a chief architect, a tool technical lead. What is that? Well, a lot of organizations fall into the anti-pattern, or I should be more blunt, make the mistake of maybe not buying enterprise licenses. And now I need somebody to give me access into that artifact for me to update it. So I end up with a artifact proxy, or I need someone to help me through how to plug this tool into our team, right? So we find that organizations have a need for an individual that I can go to as a designated role that is that tool technical lead that allows me to get over challenges. And then the artifact proxy is that individual that is somewhat responsible for making sure that the artifacts are updated. This is to make up for the anti-pattern of not having full access to all the tools, which you want to resolve at the root. And then, of course, the good old Agile coach. Right? Any new roles, any additional roles that are not here that you are using in your team? So I'm going to say roles that you are using today that may not be on this list. That would help us understand more of the landscape and what else is out there to help you through. You might have something like a social chairman, right? The business analyst, yes. In recent days, the business analyst has also become more central. Normally you see it in a scaling environment, but now with distribution being a lot more clear about the requirements has become key. DevOps specialist, yes. So this idea of being an integrator that allows us to move the items through into maybe deploying and even releasing in a faster manner. By the way, a recent survey also that we ran shows that the majority of organizations are now practicing releases that are no more than a month in frequency. That's very good from when we were, which used to be, the average was quarterly releases. Now it's monthly releases, and that window shows to be shrinking more and more. Excellent. The event challenges. Let's talk about events. So when we talk about distributed teams, there it is, time zone differences. The biggest one that, the biggest group that faces these tend to be distributed teams, normally because the distributed teams takes the geographically dispersed role as well, or composition, where folks are maybe in India and other folks are in California. That's quite a quite a separation in time zone, right? And language barriers tend to get in the way of that for similar reasons. Um, Conversations going off tangent, right? So what you hear is one side just starting to talk about their particular issues, and then another side talking about their issues, and they go off and they feed each other because they're able to look at each other in a way that excludes the rest, and it goes off on tangents. Lack of consensus, a way to agree on things, it just takes a lot longer, and difficulty holding retrospectives. Right? We talked about that one. Distributed members, the coordination between the different time zones becomes difficult in this case, because you could be introducing 7 people from 7 different time zones in a fully distributed environment, and that could be challenging. Longer activity times, just getting people on board. Where do I click? Oh, hold up, my video isn't working. That takes time. Um, Unable to attend from home, there's that infrastructure challenge that you brought up earlier. Individuals may not be able to attend from home either because of corporate policy or because they simply don't have that infrastructure or the bandwidth. In some places, maybe even electricity could be a factor sometimes, right? Missing members, this is one that we were surprised at, right? And think about how that frustrating that could be. If you're holding an event and a member is just not there and nowhere to be found, that becomes now a significant challenge. So teams have mitigated that by requiring individuals that if they have an emergency, or they can be that they text, or that they email, or that they Slack, they provide a list through their team working agreement. So you mitigate this one through your team working agreement in terms of what are the expectations if you cannot make an event, right? And then lack of participation. You might attend, but your video's off, you're muted, you're off to the side doing other things. Hybrid distribution has the previous plus ineffective communication. You don't understand me. Maybe I sound a little like this, and that becomes very difficult for you to understand. So how teams are organized affects how teams can connect, and the quality of their voice, their video, their artifacts, what they're sharing. Frequent distractions, that one we can't fault anyone for now. We fault COVID-19 for that. We are living in the same place that we are working, so there's a lot of that happening. Lack of preparation to the meeting. So in other words, what we normally see is, oh, wait a minute, I didn't have a conference room booked for this meeting. Can everyone wait? Now I am a remote member trying to dial into a meeting that hasn't started, and I have no visibility into what's going on over there. And next thing you know, the whole thing breaks apart and the event failed. The disengagement between the team members, just the fact that it's easy to hide. So calling on team members, hey, any thoughts on this, or can we retrospect on this particular item? And then of course, low retrospective outcomes. The fact that, hey, retrospectives, hey, here's a note, send it in, okay, we're done. It's just not a very effective way to get things into our Kaizen mode, right? So these are the challenges we normally are seeing. And distraction from home, Warren mentioned, is a big factor. Thank you for that, Warren. Event challenges, I'm gonna add to that, right? And if you could tell us what your event challenges are, they might not be listed here. It would be great to see that, right? Excellent. Yeah, workspace from home is the big one, right? It just is where we are today with COVID. We're just sort of learning to live with that, and turning on your virtual background is a way to and sort of keep those background distractions from happening, and being understanding of your teammates and that they might be struggling with children that are being virtual, going to virtual school, and at the same time working. It is hard. Sometimes just having simple social time where we understand each other's predicament helps us to be more tolerant of the reality we're in right now. Right. Also, team working agreement helps with that, because what was my comfortable time to work might not be anymore. And we might come to an agreement that I prefer to work later in the day where I can focus more. That of course depends on the whole team. And that's why a team working agreement with working hours and contact and means of communication might be an effective way to mitigate a lot of this, right? The spouse also working from home. We are all dealing with that. Yes, some of us have the ability to be in a room, others don't, where we're sharing the same space, and now we need to share the same sound or communication, right? Long and unfruitful meetings, all actions and or follow-ups. Yes, we normally mitigate that one with either a talking stick. Some applications like WebEx allow you to pass the beach ball that they have, and that becomes the way in which you know that you can speak. Others keep a time box. I keep a very clear time box whenever we are in a subject. I literally open a clock and I run it whenever we're time boxing specific items, and the team gets to see that in the sharing your screen is your friend because it keeps everybody on the same page. And meetings with no agenda. Thank you for sharing that, Chris. That's a huge one, right? Just going into a meeting and not knowing what we're going to be tackling. I prefer to always send the event invites modified for each of the events, knowing what we're going to be seeing during the sprint review if we're practicing Scrum, and knowing how those items are going to progress, right? So an agenda is a big way to keep us focused. It tends to be also because teams might not be familiar with the event, and coaching them through the purpose of the event and what the outcomes are that are expected goes a long way as well, right? These are some of the events that we see in distributed environments. These include things like the daily Scrum. That's our stand-up. Very, very useful. If you are not holding a daily Scrum, you are not fully benefiting from distributed Agile. It is a must. It is one of the ways in which the teams are going to connect. Not having them every week, not having them every other day, every day. In fact, some teams are having it now twice a day when they're distributed, at the beginning and at the end of the day, and they're able to bring other time zones in when that additional time zone um, becomes accessible to them. Okay. I am just putting my delimiter here, and I am inspecting and adapting. My theory is that if I put these early, you will be volunteering yours as I speak. Sprint planning, of course, sprint reviews, all of those are familiar to you. Some of the ones that you might not be as familiar with, social events. It is critical that you are methodical about social time with your teams. Scheduling happy hours, as cliche as it might be 8 months after coronavirus, is still a very big way to connect team members. Showing share for social purposes, cultural holidays, all ideas that help you connect with your team members. If you're not doing those, give it a shot, start small and see how it goes, right? Um, Product backlog refinement. Refinement is not an event in the Scrum guide. It is an activity that's expected to happen on an ongoing basis. In distributed environments, we find that it is very useful if it is treated as an event, at least in part. So here's what I like to do. Normally, according to the Scrum guide, the team should not work more than 10% of their time on refinement, the development team, to assist the product owner. I like to split that in half. So take 5% of the time from the team to be event driven, and then leave the other 5% for ad hoc assistance that is needed for development. What does that look like? In a 2-week sprint, which is what most of the industry is practicing today. In fact, we just ran a recent survey that showed that 80% of the industry is practicing two-week sprints. The product backlog refinement event could be 2 hours per week, still leaving you with 5% of the team's time during a sprint for you to approach individuals and get the consensus. Right? So it leads to a very, very clear product backlog, which we're going to see is one of the key elements of being effective in distributed environments. Program planning, that's PI planning maybe, right? PO sync up. The POs traditionally, they don't sync up on a regular basis because they were working together with the teams and they saw each other in the hallway. Here, you need to have some form of PO sync up if you're distributed. It's essential. In the executives, same scenario. I mentioned this is not a scaling topic, but in this case, it's important for the executives to also sync up in order to address the impediments that are being escalated. So when you're having problems, as that problem escalates in near real time through the network of Scrum or Scrum of Scrums, if you're practicing that, the executives are meeting on a periodic basis to address any impediments that's affecting the organization. It's not possible now to walk by the office and poke your head in. You need to be more methodical about how you address this with your manager and with any additional executives that have an influence to help you with a problem relating to the Scrum or the Agile effort. Oh, let's go back and let's look at what are some of the events that you are holding. And you're holding retrospectives, daily Scrums, retros. Most teams have the standard of 5 Scrum events. Some have the SOS and release planning. Excellent. By the way, when we say 5 Scrum events, most folks tend to think that the product backlog refinement is the 5th event. The 5th event is actually the sprint itself. So you need to make sure that your sprint is time boxed and that you're generating an increment at the end if you're practicing Scrum. And is that the same as stakeholder sync up? It's a question. Yeah, if your stakeholders are part of the executive leadership, normally stakeholders also tend to have some client representation and other interested parties. In this case, it's about those decision makers that can help remove impediments, but it could include stakeholders that are influential in doing so. Yeah, so very good question. How long should the product backlog refinement be? Well, that depends. I hate to give that answer, but in this case, it really does. It should be a process that allows you to have enough product backlog items ready for at least 2 sprints. Don't go into 10 sprints because by the time you're all the way up there, it would have changed anyway. But you don't want to be caught with the next sprint and not having enough product backlog items as a product owner. So it should be the time that you need. Most product owners should be working on a daily basis on product backlog refinement. That is your primary role as a product owner. Having the product backlog refinement sessions with the development team is so that you get the technical expertise that you need to make that happen. That should not occupy more than 10% of the team's time per sprint. Okay. The refinement, the product backlog refinement to be defined priority along with the definition of done. Product backlog refinement to be defined priority. Yeah, so during refinement, you absolutely want to prioritize your items. You want to get them to ready. You want to have a general agreement on what it will be, what it will mean for a product backlog item to be ready for development. We tend to call that the definition of ready, and agree with the team so that as a product owner, you know everything that is needed in there so that they can accept that into the sprint, right? Excellent. Artifact related challenges. This is what we normally see. Distributed teams are faced with security compliance. They don't have clear descriptions. We just pounded on that when it comes to the product backlog. Not having a clear product backlog that is ready for development, at least for the next 2 sprints, will bite you in a distributed environment a lot more than it would in a co-located environment. Low transparency and outdated information tend to be the higher problems for distributed teams. For distributed team members, and when I say outdated information, I mean outdated artifacts. Distributed team members have low information radiators. I can't see the items unless I go look for them. They're essentially have unprepared product backlog items, similar to what we saw in the previous, but just showing up to an event and not having those now throws the whole chain of events into late releases. And then the hybrid distribution. Let me do the same over here. I'd like to hear some of your artifact challenges. And feel free to put those in. We have a question. We're going to come back to that question, Misty. The hybrid distribution often deals with lack of access because of either infrastructure problems or compliance problems or access to the necessary tool because of many reasons. Unable to find the information. Where do I go to get this stuff? Unable to get the information from other team members. So knowledge sharing because of that tribal mindset that builds at the co-located environment and the teams that are dialing in remotely, or vice versa. In this case, where I might possess the knowledge as a remote team member and having shared and have not shared that or had the opportunity to share it with the team. And then they tend to face lack of tool choices. Hybrid distribution tends to have the most complex needs when it comes to tools. That was a surprise. Hybrid teams, because it needs to accommodate those individuals that are working together, they want to do it effectively. They want to be able to move stickies around because that's how they did it. And at the same time, it needs to accommodate distributed team members. So it sort of needs to be the best of both worlds combined into a single tool. So hybrid distribution tends to be more challenged. Okay? And you volunteered a few of those. Information stored everywhere. No consistency when it comes to information. Yes, this is part of a very strong team working agreement. The working agreement becomes an essential artifact in distributed Agile. Everyone knows where and what it is. Yeah, for everyone to be able to find that artifact. Some of the techniques include a central central launch pad to the artifact. So if you're using Confluence, if you know any link, know your Confluence link, and you would have a single page that allows you to go from there into any particular artifact, right? So a launch location for all of your tools is critical. Otherwise, your team's gonna get lost. Consistency, so we touched on that, and consistency and unclear descriptions in terms of the product backlog item, I'm assuming, Toro. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, excellent. I'm gonna go to Misty's question. So what is the difference between release planning and program planning? There is no difference. Well, I'm sorry, release planning. I thought you meant, yeah. Program planning and release planning. So program planning is about, hey, it's a PI planning for those of you that are familiar with SAFe. It's about, program planning is about what are we going to achieve over the next quarter. In the case of SAFe, let's look at what our high level objectives are. Let's decompose those and let's look at the dependencies and let's agree on which teams are going to work on what and by when they will have those, right? Whereas release planning is, hey, here's our velocity, here's our set of teams and what they are delivering on a periodic basis, and understanding what the effort involved in the rest of the work that we need to do, we know that we can get X amount of work done in a month. And that's going to be our release. So this is what we're going to include in our next month's release. So one is about planning and divvying up the work. That's the program increment or program planning or big room planning. The other one is about being able to determine how to utilize that in a release frequency. Okay. And then we have our artifacts. The artifacts challenges that we're seeing: security issues, consistency, extreme left for working software, over comprehensive documentation. Yeah, so again, observing the Agile manifesto becomes a challenge, right? Excellent. Thank you for volunteering all of that information. Very, very useful. I am going to go into the artifacts that are necessary or that are more frequent in a distributed Agile. And they look like this, right? You have the product backlog, nothing new there, the sprint backlog, the sprint goals, some of the surprises or things that might not be as common. Make sure you have a team working agreement. Make sure you have a team contact sheet. When can I contact you and how? It's not just a roster, but hey, I need to know so that I'm not being rude or approaching it the wrong way. The work progress, what's your velocity, what's your burn down, making that visible. Definition of done, definition of ready, having your code repository if you're dealing with software, and your impediment backlog. Impediment backlog are the problems that you're seeing on an everyday basis, and making sure that those are being addressed on a periodic basis. You need an actual artifact that has your impediments. Okay. What other artifacts are you using? What artifacts are you using? And I'm going to go to our last slide here in the interest of time. We have 2 minutes left, and hopefully we've been able to address your questions as they go. Hence, we extended it out to the full session. But how do we make it work when it comes to techniques? Make sure that you have your daily communication. Make sure that you establish cadence. Make it predictable. These events need to happen on a certain day at a certain time so that it's easier across time zones and individuals' work-life balance. Respond fast. Make sure that you're removing roadblocks. How do you do that? By using an impediment backlog. Keep common Scrum events, synchronize everyone. Teams finishing at different times become messy in a distributed environment. Backlog decomposition. Make sure that you're practicing that on a regular basis. Have common definition of done, and I would advise also common definition of ready. To address the trust and belonging issue, make sure that you have common sprint goals. The sprint goals becomes central now. Create a safe place for individuals. Celebrate failure. Literally have a virtual trophy that you pass around if individuals admit to having made a mistake, because that is something that we learned. And self-organized individuals, self-managed individuals. That means they get to choose how and what they work on based on the prioritization that has been established. And outcome-based mindset. Don't manage captivity, manage outcomes. What have we delivered? When you did that and how you did that is irrelevant. What we care about is delivering value. Make sure that you make time to socialize, happy hours, or any other opportunity. And always, always, always video on. It breaches distance in a tremendous way and it increases trust. Okay. With that, any other questions? I'm going to put big question marks here. We are at top of the hour, but I want to make sure that we didn't miss any burning questions that anyone might have had in relation to what we just covered. Okay. Katrine, I'll defer back to you to wrap it up. Oh, someone's asking, I'm not familiar with code repository. Can you elaborate on what that is? So this is the idea that you need to have some form of collaborating with your code if you're dealing with software, right? For me to have it in a localized environment where I upload it to the server in a host in a co-located environment is not practical anymore. That we need to be checking in code in a CD, in a continuous deployment and continuous integration environment. So automation become essential. Will the slides be shared? Yes, we will share that. Expert Agile Club will reach out with a link so that you have a PDF version of what we shared today. Okay. With that, I want to thank you very, very much for being great listeners and also participating via chat in this forum.